Hello, everyone, and welcome for another episode of The Ball is Round. I'm Hady Raphael, and tonight on the show, Brazil edges the Canadian women's national teams at Stade Saputo in front of a record crowd, end of year drama for CF Montreal during the press conference, and of course, the post mortem on Olivier Renard and Hernan Lozada. That and a lot more on episode 153 of The Ball is Round. Yeah, so as you can see, guys, I'm finally back. I'm a bit rusted, so sorry about that, as you can see in my intro. But I'm happy to be joined by my friend, my good friend, Elias Gregoriadis. Hey, Elias, how are you today?
Oh, better than I was yesterday. Let's just say that. But
Yeah,
no, I'm doing all right. And I'm happy to be back on the air with you, of course.
nice. And as you can see, guys, we're joined by a special guest, Alexander Gange-Ruzik. Now, if you follow a tiny bit of Canadian soccer, you know him. It's as simple as that. That's how known he is. That's how he's just the master of soccer right now in Canadian soccer. It's as simple as that. You can see him on One Soccer, Northern Football, Canadian Premier League, or his own pod, the third sub pod. Thanks for being here, Alex.
Oh, that was Hadi, great to be on, and that was fantastic. I appreciate that. So pleasure to chat football, especially Montreal. I mean, it's been how would we say interesting? I think entertaining was the word we were throwing about before the show season and the end of season. So lots to talk about. And of course, I mean the women's national team. that's all I could say, I guess, really at this point.
Exactly, and what a special day it was yesterday at Stade Saputo. So interesting. We're gonna dive right into it because that's what's really important right now. That game that was played by the Canadian national team yesterday, with Stade Saputo hosting the national team, I think for the second time in the recent times right now, in front of a record crowd of 19,619 fans on Saturday. It's a record for an international friendly in the province of Quebec, which is really, really interesting. How important is that for the future of international soccer in Quebec, Alex?
I think it's huge because for whatever reason, I mean it's no secret that people want the games, men's and women's, to be spread around the country. I think it's a good thing. I think personally, I got to see it firsthand last year when the women's national team came to Victoria in British Columbia on the island, and those sorts of games they mean something to be able to go to those sorts of communities where they love the team, but maybe they don't get that access up close. And Montreal, even though it's one of the biggest cities in the country, it shouldn't be one of those forgotten about cities. It's a place that hasn't gotten national team games. I mean, what were they saying? It's been since 6-7 years since Montreal's had a competitive men's or women's game. It's just been usually friendlies of the sort. So this is huge to show that, look, even if it's a friendly, even, of course it helps that it's a Christine Sinclair send-off game, of course, but that they were able to show up and be there. And it was a beautiful day. I thought that was good just to show that why these games should be played elsewhere and why it's so special that they're going to play in Halifax now that they've just played in Montreal, that these should be happening way more often than it does.
Exactly. Elias, do you think that Sinky's announcement helped filling that stadium? Because I think before the announcement, I think there was about 10 or 11,000 tickets sold only. And then as soon as the announcement came in, we saw, people like rushing to get tickets and for that stadium to be filled. Do you think that that's just a one-off from Montreal regarding the national team, or do you think it's a trend that's going to keep on happening every time there's a game here?
I think it's a bit of both. I think that that announcement maybe accelerated it. But I think that, one way or another, this is going to be a record crowd. Even if it wasn't maybe going to be a sellout, it was definitely going to be very close to a sellout. And I think that, yeah, I mean, when you have someone of that magnitude kind of let you know that this is your last chance to see me play in your home stadium, that's that's always going to be something. And at the same time, Brazil has no shortage of representation in Montreal and in Quebec. And when they show up, and you could definitely hear it during the entire game. And you could definitely see it in the crowd too. There was more than a couple pockets of yellow. So yeah, I mean those two things combined, I think, just made for a very good atmosphere and kind of also reinforced the fact that you can have these games in Montreal and have them just feel electric.
Yeah, exactly, and it helped, of course, that Marta was here too, of course, because
Exactly.
as you said, there was a few pockets of Brazilian supporters, and they all came, of course, to see their national teams. But of course, one of the legends of the game, also Marta, that was here too. But let's look at the game itself. Beth Friesman chose to stick to her guns with another 3-4-3 formation. Let's look at the lineup that she decided to go for that game. So we have Sheridan in goal. We had the three center backs with Buchanan, Quinn, and Jade Rose. As a right wing back, Ashley Lawrence. As a left wing back, Sidney Collins. In the middle of the pitch, we had Quinn and Fleming. And then the top three, you had Prince as a striker, Leon as a right wing back, and Lacasse as a left wing back. Thoughts, Alex? I have a lot to say, but I'll leave you the floor first. What do you think about that starting 11?
You know what? I thought it was the right choice just because I think it'd be easy maybe to go with hindsight and look at the performance itself, which let's be honest, it was not great, really not good. Really, I don't think there's much you can take for it. But I think I wrote heading into it, I wanted to see them at least continue and try to build off what they showed the last window. And I said at least I'd rather have them learn trying something and fail trying something than maybe stick to a bit of status quo. Because I think we learned a lot from this game, which is important. As frustrating as it is, you learned a lot. I mean, we can dive into the game specifically. I wasn't happy with the adjustments. I think this would have been a great opportunity to see what was going on and adjust, perhaps throw another body in midfield, try some things at the back, experiment a little bit more. But I was happy heading into the game. Okay, they're sticking with this 3-4-3. I do think long term, I think there's a solution there with the back three that works. But I think as they saw in this game, there's still a lot they need to learn, such as how they build out from the back. Because I mean, Brazil's press overwhelmed them all game long, and the fact they didn't adjust shows some of the shortcomings they need to fix if they're going to be able to compete against top teams. Because it's been over the last year, we've seen Brazil high press Canada, we've seen Australia high press, we've seen Nigeria even to an extent high press. US teams know that if you high press Canada, you can cause problems. So I think Canada's going to have to figure that out themselves, because every team in the world is going to continue to press them high if this is the result that they'll get.
Very interesting. Elias, regarding the starting 11, what did you think? Did you have any thoughts?
No, I kind of agree with Alexandre. Right? It was a pretty unsurprising starting 11. You see people like Sinclair, you see people like Vivier, who is from Quebec, and you think, okay, they'll come on as subs. And, Vivier didn't get the chance to come on, which was a little disappointing, especially given the kind of form she's in. But, as a starting 11, I was happy that, we did see a lot of attacking weapons out there, even not just as that front three, but also, people like Ashley Lawrence, who is very strong going forward. And, who does bring that width and that pace that you need to make the 3-4-3 work. And so a lot of those, elements in the starting lineup, we kind of talked about it on the show before those games against Jamaica. What I wanted to see from this team is growth. What I want to see this team is, have you taken the lessons you learned in this World Cup, and have you grown from them? Have you evolved from them? And seeing those performances against Jamaica, we saw that, and I was happy to see this formation at least, and this lineup that, there was still that intention of playing that way and playing with that same kind of mentality. Now, what happened after? I mean, that's neither here. That's another thing. But at least the intention at the start of the game was a good sign.
You know what? I do hear you guys. I'm not in agreement. I'm going to tell you why. Okay. For me, this is a chance of building something bigger than what's been built right now. Okay. You're playing in Montreal. You have 6 Quebecers in your squad. Yes, I understand that you're playing a 3-4-3. You want to establish and you want to make sure that you see those the build-ups and those combinations between the same players. I completely understand that, but also you're also building a group. You need that group to know that they will have a chance at one point. What happens if just before the Olympics, one of those main girls in the starting 11 gets injured? The other players would not have seen a game from the startup. So for me, it's important to give them their chance in the starting 11 right away. And you're in Montreal. You have so many players that should be in that starting 11 for a friendly game in Montreal for the send off of Christine Sinclair. I think that would have been really nice for Quebec, for the province of Quebec. That would be really nice. And not only that, it's not like that's the last friendly game before the Olympics. You have at least 3 more games before the Olympics, and that's at least before the end of 2023. You have 3 more games. You have experimented that starting 11 against Jamaica. That's exactly the same starting 11 that started like in the first game against Jamaica. There was a change in the second game with Grosso coming in for Quinn, but it's the same starting 11. I think we should have seen Evelyne Vian play as a starter in that starting 11. I think we should have seen maybe a Bianca Saint-Georges, a Gabby Carr. Now, I do understand that Gabby Carr was a bit injured just before the game, but I think we should have seen that in that starting 11 to let them know, and for Brest Friesen to let them know, I see you girls. I see what you're doing. I see what you're capable of. And you know what? In front of your home crowd, here's a nod. Here's what I'm giving you. This is how you concern a whole group. So I don't know if you guys want to rebound on that or answer all that, but that's my honest opinion regarding the starting 11.
I mean, I'll agree with you with Evelyne Vian, but that's a whole other discussion. I just think, again, for the last few years, she's scored so many goals that I don't know what else she needs to do to get a look. That's a whole other story. I'd say I'd agree with the premise, at least in terms of getting them on the field. 100% they're at home. It's been a while since you're at Montreal. I think there's no reason why a Gabby Carl can't come off the bench. Especially Evelyne Vian, that one's pretty inexcusable. Again, given her form, she scored 6 goals for Roma. Like it's
crazy.
It's a pretty big club. I would disagree with the starting 11 because I think no matter who they put out there, if they kept the same formation, I think they would have struggled. I think that would have been unfair to some of those players, perhaps, to start, and then they maybe wear some of the blame, like, oh, it's because those new players came in that Canada struggled. So I think because they were so good against Jamaica, again, I think I put this out there that I was like, they were good against Jamaica, but it was worth noting that Jamaica sat deeper. And Canada's kind of had success against teams that sit deeper and invite them. Like we've said, Canada struggled with teams that press. And I think, again, the fact that Brazil did what they did, I think it would have been unfair to the Quebecois players to kind of, because I think they would have wore maybe some of the brunt, like, oh, you made all these changes. Why not stick with what would have worked or what worked against Jamaica? So I think it's one where I think it was, again, good from the start, but like there was no changes at halftime, right? Like, again, that would have been a great chance to bring in an Evelyne Vian for a 45, a Gabby Carl for a 45. So that's why I'd stick with the idea that I like the starting 11 from the start, but I think from 45 onwards, that's where I think really Priestman could have, done a lot better with some of the players she brought in. And perhaps, again, that's where you maybe try a 3-5-2 instead of a 3-4-3 or little things like that. So that's where we'll agree to disagree. But
but you know what? I do agree with you. Maybe that would have been a bit more added pressure on the new starters. I completely understand it, but you don't know that before the beginning of the game, right? So I understand that when you see the result, yeah, for sure, I agree with you 100%. But you don't know the result before you're starting the game, and that's why I'm like, we should have maybe started with someone. But again, agree to disagree on that. Elias, anything else to add on the starting 11, or do we move on?
No, I mean, I'm pretty much in agreement with Alex. I mean, it's kind of where my head was at too, especially in the second half. So let's go on to the game.
Perfect. Let's start with the game. The first few minutes were all about Canada and that right flank. Leon, Lawrence, and sometimes Prince connecting very well, but nothing really dangerous came up from those half chances. How important is it to see Ashley Lawrence as a right wing back, Elias? I know we talked a lot about it here on The Ball Is Round. It's her position, and you can see it right away. She's so at ease with that position. She's so good with the ball. She knows exactly how to move and how to create danger. Do you think that's the right fit for Ashley Lawrence?
Absolutely, and that was probably my biggest, beef with this game was the fact that after the first 15 minutes, like you said, it wasn't anything very dangerous, but the most progress was being made on the flanks, even on the left side between Collins and Claire Cass, right? There was still some good progress being made, not as much on as the right side, but there was still gains being made, and that kind of let Quinn and Fleming navigate the middle of the park, because as a two-man midfield, you have to always be kind of aware of your counterattack. And if you can have your flanks as engaged as possible, that lets the midfielders do what they do best and not have to worry about 4,500 different things. So my biggest problem was the fact that after a certain point, we started we started to see the fullbacks kind of invert a little bit and play a bit more centrally and let the outside center backs kind of not fill in as full on fullbacks, but play a bit closer to the touchline. And that's when everything started to fall apart because, like you said, Brazil pressed incredibly high up the field. And this was honestly purely in terms of ball distribution, I thought that Quinn had an excellent game in terms of just being that pivot and being that metronome in the midfield. And when you invert and then you kind of just condense everything, that's when they started to struggle, because that all of a sudden Quinn has not just, all this open space because Brazil's worried about the flanks, but now that you have your wing backs inverted, that invites more pressure into the middle. So in those first 15 minutes, in those first, before we saw that kind of change, the midfield was clicking because all they had to do was then receive the ball, kind of draw in some pressure, and then give the ball out wide. And it was very simple and very effective. So my biggest problem was that move from the wingbacks that kind of locked everything up almost and slowed Montreal, slowed Canada's attack down considerably.
Alex, thoughts on what Elias said? There's just one thing I really want you to comment on the left flank. I didn't see a lot of connections between Collins and Lacasse, but maybe I'm the one that really missed it. But I think that there was a lack of um, play between the two, lack of combinations between the two. I didn't see them connect enough on the left flank. Do you agree with that, or did you see anything else?
Yeah, the left flank was a bit weird because I think I saw some good runs, some good movement, but
Yeah.
I think the final third in general is a bit disjointed. Like it was just missing the final ball more, missing some of those the killer passes. But yeah, it was strange because the first 15 minutes felt kind of smooth. It was like, okay, the wingbacks are getting up the field. That's what you want. And they just kind of pinned back and dropped back. And I don't know if that was because they saw Brazil started to press more and they felt they had to drop back and support. And it felt like for at least for the large parts of 15 to 45, that stretch of 30 minutes, it was like Canada was just constantly pinned back with 7 in their own half, right? It was the 3 at the back, the 2 wing backs and the 2 CMs. And that was kind of like, in the first 15, every time the Canada's wing backs got running and got pushing forward and started overlapping, that's where all their danger came from. So yeah, I would say that was the big surprise to see that they just kind of dropped back. So it was like the World Cup, right? It was like there was different because you're playing a back 4, but yeah, every time that Lawrence and Riviere dropped below the half line and kind of stopped moving their feet, that's where Canada, I think, struggled in the buildup. They were just too static, and then it kind of just extended. I think it was at one point I was watching and I was like, it was almost frustrating because there was no movement as well. Like that was another thing that was very noticeable, that there was just no movement, no one trying to, again, if you're going to beat a press, it has to be one touch and it has to be a lot of off ball running. And then they were just static, and it was kind of laughable as well because they're like, I'd love to be on Brazil pressing Canada in that case, because you just go stand beside your player and your job's done. Like you don't have to do much because they're not offering the movement, the off ball runs. They're not like, the wing backs aren't stretching, because if they're doing that, at least you're forced to think, okay, what if Canada goes long to the wing backs and they beat our press with the direct ball? But then also, as we know, Canada doesn't have a direct ball outlet, for better, for worse. There's, Nichelle Prince isn't going to be that striker that's going to be taking down those long balls. Jordan Hoytema isn't. Maybe Evelyn Vian, but we haven't seen it. So that also contributed. So it was a few of those factors. I think it was really a return to what struggled at the World Cup, it felt like.
There's a lot of things there that you said that are very, very interesting, that you both said, of course, that are very, very interesting. There was that injury on the 22nd minute of Jessie Fleming coming out and Julia Grosso coming in. A lot of people, and even Beth Priestman in the presser afterwards, she said that having someone like Jessie Fleming would have been better for ball possession, and they needed to keep the ball a bit more. For me, I don't think that it was because of Jessie Fleming or not. And exactly as you guys said, I think that tactically there was something that wasn't really working because of maybe the wing backs really dropping back a bit more, because of the fact that they were inverted at one point. I don't know exactly what happened, but I think that midfield was missing a player. It's as simple as that. We saw, first of all, the tactical plan of Brazil, and we saw that the press that Canada was really trying to do is for the three forwards to press on a defense, but the midfield wasn't following on that press. So as soon as Brazil was able to go through those three forwards, there was acres of space, and then you would see Canada really struggle every freaking time during the whole game. It's just not normal. And let's talk about the changes that Beth Priestman made during that game. Okay, we're not going to go play by play because we talked a lot about the plays and everything. But first of all, she was forced to do the change with of course Grosso coming in for Fleming. But for me, that's not really a tactical change. That's just because you're replacing one player with another, exactly the same role, approximately the same role, and everything. But afterwards, on the 57th minute, you see Heidema coming in for Prince, Rivière coming in for Collins. First of all, I was happy to see Jade Rivière coming in as a left wing back and not as a right wing back for Ashley Lawrence to switch. That I was happy with that. But Heidema coming in for Prince, first of all, why did we see Heidema play on the right flank and Leon playing as a striker? I found that very weird. If you're going to put Heidema, just put her as a number 9. Put her up front. What do you guys think about that? Elias, let's start with you.
Yeah, I agree with you, right? Heidema's done, some of her best work as a poacher, right? And as someone that can kind of get into the area and get on those final balls that we kind of talked about that weren't really there. And Leon had a great connection with Ashley Lawrence. So I was a bit, I was perplexed when I ended up seeing, I saw Jordan Heidema play on the wing. I was like, okay, maybe they just switched and then they're going to switch back. And then they just didn't switch back. So that was a bit of an eyebrow raiser because, I agree with you. I think that, you can't sacrifice, I maybe if that was Beth Priestman's plan all along, I understand. But when someone is in that position and someone's finding that space, you don't want to switch them, right? You don't want to kind of interfere with arguably one of the only good things that you've got going forward. So that was a bit of a question mark in terms of, substitutions. And then I feel like, Nichelle Prince didn't have her best game. I find that, far too often she kind of just stood in between the center backs. And like we said, right, movement off the ball doesn't just apply to, the wing backs trying to get open and trying to look for an outlet pass. It applies to the striker, especially if you don't have a 10 to play off of. You have to kind of create your own space. And there was a huge gap between, Quinn and Grosso and Prince for that, 40 minutes between Grosso coming on and Prince coming off. So I think that there was a lot of fine tuning that we didn't see. That that's what you need to get to the next level, because we saw that on with that momentum and with that start, there was a lot of competitiveness there that we didn't maybe see in other iterations, especially at the World Cup. So there was that fire and there was that oh my god, did they actually figure it out for that opening sequence? And then with those changes, they kind of reverted back into their shell and became much less dangerous going forward. So I think that, just that fine tuning is still something that needs to be done. And that comes with, first of all, like we said, playing more players and getting as much information as you can. Because if you know as much as you can about your starting 11, but are not too familiar with your subs and with your key rotational players, then when it comes into the minutia of your changes and of your adjustments at the hour mark, you're going to be the team that suffers. And Brazil's changes were extremely effective. They brought on lots of energy, and they
Yeah,
continued that
I
press when they
agree.
brought in they just threw more forwards at them, because after you spend your forwards with that press, they had an extra couple players of first of all extremely high quality, but also just fresh legs. So Brazil didn't have to change anything because Canada didn't make them change. So I think that Beth Priestman's next challenge is kind of just keeping other managers guessing.
That's very interesting. Alex, just what do you think about what Elias just said? Beth Priestman not really knowing her subs. Like, how bad is that for a national team coach? Do you agree with that first? And do you think that's a big hurdle for Beth Priestman going forward?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because it's funny. I feel like at the World Cup, funnily enough, I think Priestman did a good job of her
Yeah,
subs at the World Cup. So it's like she knows, right? Like it was something at the World Cup. It was almost funny. Like I remember the Ireland game. We're all sitting there like Sophie Schmidt, and she went on and ended up. It was a master class. They ended up winning against Ireland. So it's something where you can't be like Priestman has a history of it. Like at the World Cup, she hit all the right buttons. So I think for me, it was a bit surprising, and perhaps this is also maybe a staff as well, because I wonder maybe whoever was also on the tactical cam, if they could have picked up some of these things. I just was so I would agree with Elias that I was so surprised that they didn't adjust a thing, like that they were okay like for like, right? Like 'cause especially I think now that you think back again, this is hindsight. Maybe I'm reading into it too much. We keep talking about the 15-minute to 45th minute struggle. I mean, Jesse Fleming first went down with that injury around the 15th minute. It's something where you could see, okay, maybe because as we know with Fleming, she does a lot of running, right? Like that's the
yeah,
thing you hear about,
yeah,
like the kilometers covered and etc. I think if you've seen that for 30 minutes, that Grosso and Quinn just simply weren't able to match the running of Fleming. And again, that's not a knock on Quinn and Grosso. That's more of a compliment to Fleming that she can do that sort of running. And, when she's out of the lineup, you notice her absence. I was just surprised that, okay, like I was just watching the game, and every time in my head I was like, this game needs someone, and they need another body in midfield. They need another body in midfield. Brazil's just overwhelming them, constantly pressing. Yeah, the subs being like for like was kind of just, again, probably you're laughing if you're Brazil and you're frustrated if you're Canada, because they had a chance to be like, okay, screw it. Bring in, for example, and hey, this helps because she's Quebecois. Bring in Aladou, right? She's been having a good
yeah.
season for Benfica. She's a midfielder. Throw in a third midfielder. Go Quinn, Grosso, Aladou. At least try to see what a third body could look like and see if that will help take away from Brazil's press. Because yeah, I think just bringing in Hoydema, because again, I mean, Hoydema is a frustrating one because she continues to be miscast for Canada. I just
Yeah,
think she's not properly used. It's not so much Hoydema struggling. I think it's more of just what she's being asked to do. Again, we see it all the time with Rain. She goes back to the range. She scores, like Elias mentions, these great number 9 goals, a header in the box, one touch finishes. And for Canada, she's asked to do a lot of hold up play, target striker play, back to goal. And that's not a knock. That's just not her game. And I think, again, by making that move and shunting her out to the right wing where like naturally you're going to get more touches, naturally you're going to have to do a lot of those things. It was just kind of, again, admitting like, okay, we want to go direct. But when reality, the problem wasn't going direct. They were breaking Brazil's lines. The problem is that they would then give it away. And I think if they had a third midfielder, they could have potentially helped break those lines better. So yeah, I think the changes were more, I was like, okay, great. Like, bringing in Hoydema could have worked if it was Hoydema for Prince, like for like, and then maybe as bold as it is, Aladou for Leon. Because I think at least you would have had a chance to try out a third midfielder. So I think that was more the issue from Priestman, that they just failed to recognize tactically. That's why I think it's kind of almost funny, but maybe funny is the wrong word because it's painful, that Brazil scores their goal 92nd minute. Yes, it's a brutal double deflection, etc. What did it all start? A turnover from the midfield. and that was happening in minute 15. It was happening in minute 90. It's kind of almost like it's funny because you're sitting there like, who would have seen that coming, right? It's not like Brazil had like 8 or 9 of their shots all game off turnovers from Canada. You would have, well, of course, one of them goes in. And I think that was the big frustration from the subs.
We talked a bit about the whole team, the team effort, the tactical side of it. Let's talk about a bit of individual performances. Kailen Sheridan, how good was she? First of all, you see the first save that she makes that was really difficult on Adriana. I think I love that save. That was that ball was going directly in the side of the net from outside the box, and a tremendous save from Kailen Sheridan. Then you see her again, the save on Debinha on the triangle play around the 62nd minute, and then again you see a save on a 72nd minute on a shot from outside the area, and then a corner and another save on Antonia. And of course, unfortunately, you need that double deflection to beat her. Elias, we talked a lot about Kailen Sheridan. We know that sometimes when she's not when she needs to go outside of her, when she needs to go to and punch the ball, sometimes she's not as good when she needs to really control the area altogether. But the rest, as a shot stopping goalkeeper, she's one of the greats. No.
Yeah, I think she's probably one of the best pure shot stoppers out there. The problem is that, and this was highlighted a little bit on the game on Saturday, the fact that, at the end of the day, shot stopping is not the only thing you need from a keeper anymore. And her distribution was, when it comes to playing
good
out to the center backs, was okay. But when it came to breaking lines and picking out, players further down the field, it was lacking. It seemed a bit wayward, right? And again, if you're having, 3 strikers that are all man marked, and you only have 2 players in the midfield, oftentimes you have to resort to just passing to your center backs and continue to build up from there. But a couple times where she opted to break lines and pick out one of the front 3, there was no real power behind it. It kind of got there, but it also wasn't you could tell
who
that
was
is
able
not
to win?
her strength.
Who was able to win that ball up front? That's
No, but
what
even
Alex
but the
said a
thing
bit
is,
earlier.
if you're playing to people's feet, right, it puts them in a much better position. But the passes just were not, they were already struggling to create space and to get separation from the defenders, and those balls did not make their lives any easier, right? And as a keeper, if you can't ping it to them right away, and you have all the time in the world, and you are a team that wants to build out like Canada's clearly trying to do, just play to your center backs and have faith that your center backs can get the job done, because we talked about it,
But
right?
they
And
haven't been
she
able
she
to.
put it on display. She put it on full
Yeah.
display, right? The shot stopping side of her has never been in question, and once again, it will not be in question, because she stood on her head. And even that goal had to take a double deflection to beat her, and even then she almost got it, right? So her, in terms of purely keeping the ball out of the net, is not what concerns me. My concern is if Canada do face, which I think the book is out now, a lot of teams now are going to be pressing further up the field because they realize just how effective it is against this team. If they play a 3-4-3, you need a keeper that can break lines automatically and just find that open player further down the field, because it accelerates the play that Canada was so clearly
Interesting.
missing. And I think that's something that needs to be developed for her to just round out her game.
Alex, your words regarding that, and of course, you think she has what it takes to develop that side of the game?
Yeah, that's an interesting one, because I mean, yeah, it's true. I think it's something where, you're not gonna call her, she's gonna be known for her shot stopping. She has been. I mean, she's been prone to some, saves of the year, and she's also been prone, as we've seen sometimes for NWSL or even with Canada, some some bloopers, as we say, moments to forget. In terms of the shot stopping, I think this was like, although like Elias mentions, it's not a surprise. I do think it was good, just because it can be easy to forget at the World Cup she did struggle a bit with her shot stopping. Think of the Olympico against Ireland and some of the other moments. I think those are little things that you saw calls for Sabrina D'Angelo to come in because of that, the shot stopping. And I think it was good for Sheridan to have a bounce back like this, to kind of show that she's still a world-class shot stopper. That didn't go away. That was more just the World Cup where nothing went right for Canada. That was among them. But yeah, the build-up part's going to be so fascinating because I think at this point, yeah, like we've seen, I don't think you're going to develop an ability to pick out players 40, 50 yards away overnight, especially not at this age. But you can still definitely work on the short game a lot more. And that one's tough to gauge what that exactly is. Like, is that Sheridan? Because that's the thing. Sometimes it's hard to tell. Is that Sheridan just ignoring orders and kind of being like, oh, I need to go direct to play safe? Or is that more tactically? But I agree. There was a few times where she went long and it was kind of like, was that necessary? But also part of that's on the center backs because it feels like at times it's hard to say, like, but there just felt like times where also some of the center backs didn't almost want to build out of the back. Like they'd get the ball and they're kind of like, ooh, like I don't want to take a risk and break a line, or
they were disjointed, right? The three of them. It felt like they never played together.
Yeah, it was weird. And I don't know, even the way that Gilles and Buchanan kept swapping side, like I was like, I personally just keep Gilles in the middle and Buchanan out wide because Buchanan's, by far the better distributor. Let her be able to just, pass. And I thought that was weird to see Gilles and whatnot. And even Jade Rose, she's a great distributor, and it feels like she barely got on the ball this game. It felt like everything was like Sheridan just kept playing it to Buchanan or Gilles, and it's like use Rose as well. So I don't know. It's just something. That's why I can't say if it's necessarily Sheridan. It just felt like for whatever reason, the chemistry between Sheridan, Rose, Gilles, and Buchanan was just off in this game. And that's something they're going to need to address because if they're going to play this, build out of the back, those are the four you're definitely going to need on the same page because that's the play starts with them. And, if you're turning the ball over, if you're not even getting it past them, then you're going to struggle.
I want to talk about the three other players, also the individual performances. So first of all, let's talk about Bianca Saint Georges that came in. The only Quebecer having minutes during that game. Beth Priestman said that she really wanted to see her, in that kind of game where it's a bit difficult against top opposition and everything. How did you think she managed under such pressure, Alex?
Yeah, I mean, it was the thing is with Saint Georges, and you see it in the NWSL, and that's part of the reason why she's carved out a good role for herself is that she gets stuck in. She's going to get involved. I mean, the fact that she left some pretty hefty tackles kind of just shows what BSG, I guess as they say, can do. So I like that side of it. At times she did drift a bit too far centrally.
I agree.
But that was also something that was happening earlier in the first half. So I guess, again, maybe that's a bit more tactical. Maybe that's a bit more personnel-wise. But, because I think with BSG, what's nice is that she's always going to get stuck in. And I think that's why I think back to Australia last year where she had a great camp. That's always going to help her because she can match up with these top teams and not be intimidated by that defensive challenge on the ball. I find she's at her best with Chicago when she's running forward and running into the final third. That's why she scores so much. That's why she assists so much. And we didn't see enough of that in this game. But even Ashley Lawrence was struggling with that. So I would say, again, it was as much tactical. So I think BSG did about as much as what you could expect and is what she could give given the circumstances, I'd say.
Yeah, and Matthew saying BSG cried of joy after the game for playing in front of family and friends. Elias, that's exactly what you want to see from friendly games. In my opinion, that's what I want to see. Yeah, of course, I want to see the tactical side of it. I want to see the team grow, of course, 100%. But also, it's a chance to give those minutes in front of your home crowd. I think that's really interesting, and also, she deserved those minutes, BSG, in that game. No.
Absolutely, and I think she's turning into a very, very strong kind of second option on that side, right? And to kind of maybe give Ashley Lawrence a breather, and if especially if it's those multi-game weeks, or if it's been a particularly demanding game, having someone like her come off the bench for Ashley Lawrence is such a good breath of fresh air, right? And we talked about her offensive output, but just her ability as a workhorse. If you're going to be playing with that three back and you need somebody to can constantly get the field but also provide support to that right flank, I mean, especially if it's just for like half an hour for however long, if she's coming on for Lawrence, there's that's an
Yeah,
excellent option to have, right? She's
she's
I don't
interesting.
know if she's good enough to be a starter outright, but she's
No,
almost
not
there. And
yet,
having
not yet.
someone but having someone at that level as a rotational player is an incredible thing for your right flanks. I think Beth Priestman kind of is a bit spoiled on that in that position, and she has two quality options that kind of complement each other well. And going forward, I mean, that's a great 1-2 punch.
Elias, I'll continue with you, Quinn. I didn't really like their game yesterday. I thought they were sometimes lost on the pitch, not really knowing who to give the ball to. Um, a lot of back passes, which is kind of normal, but we haven't seen them really give some forward plays and build something interesting. We saw it a couple of times on a few Canada chances, but that's it. I think they were a bit irrelevant in that game, and usually they showed us that they could be instrumental in the midfield, but we haven't seen that yesterday, in my opinion. Do you agree with that?
Yes and no. I think that with an injury to Jesse Fleming so early and Julia Grosso coming on, yes, technically it's a like for like substitution, but they still have very different profiles when you talk about. We talked about just how important Fleming's running is, and Quinn is not a cover every single blade of grass on the field type midfielder, right? They're much more composed. They're better with possession. They're better as a pivot. And, Julia Grosso brought really good things to the team, but, her profile left Quinn with a lot of the work, a lot of the workhorse responsibility, which again is not exactly what you want from that kind of player, from that kind of profile. So I think that when the play was spread out properly, when you had your wingers and your fullbacks holding the width, and you had the defenders and everyone was properly taking the width like they did in the beginning of the games, then yeah, Quinn was back to their best self, I think, because then they had the space to kind of navigate and govern the midfield accordingly. And the second we saw everything kind of get inverted, the team brought so much pressure, unnecessary pressure, without an outlet, because now your outlets, which are supposed to be, those fullbacks and those wide players, are now tucking in. So I think that, it put a lot of unnecessary pressure and it made Quinn's life so much more difficult. And yes, having someone like Julia Grosso and her quality on the ball and her ability to drop in between lines does help that a little bit. But at the end of the day, when you already have a team pressing you as hard as Brazil was, and then you add more pressure in the middle of the park without that outlet, then yeah, I think you're asking for a disappointing game, because a lot of times you're right. They were running around the field, especially when they didn't have the ball, and especially when you're in a position defending very compact Brazil midfield as two players, it makes your life extremely complicated.
Alex.
Yeah, I'd say it just felt like Quinn kind of got lost a bit in the Brazil press. I think on the ball, just because, yeah, I think again we kind of see they're at their best when the field spreads out, the field opens up. You can get the space to turn, to look up, to play the passes, and I think Brazil, credit to them, did a great job of just not a like. That's why I'm like I'm struggling to think a moment where Quinn got a ball turned and switched it, and that's what they're at their best. And I think that's when Brazil employs that well. And then I think it was another, I guess, consequence of the press for Quinn as well, is that they had to do so much running defensively, just because again Brazil was constantly running between the lines at Canada, and because Canada was trying to stretch and build out, and then Brazil would win the ball back, and then it was really the midfielders that had to make the constantly be tracking back to fill in the gaps. So yeah, I'd say Quinn really, they kind of suffered from the tactical, again, being that midfield. They just the midfield being off, just because of the lack of support on the ball for them, and then off the ball, just the constant amount of running that had to be
Yeah.
done in transition moments. And that's always going to be tough for a midfielder, especially in a double pivot. Again, it just felt like the double pivot as a whole, once Fleming was off, because I think that's kind of what we've learned over the last year, like against top opponents. Okay, against maybe some opponents that like to sit back, Fleming and Grosso can do a job together. Otherwise, against top teams, Fleming has to be in your double pivot for it to have a chance. If not, it's clear that it's going to struggle in this game. Quinn and Grosso both really Wharton. I guess Quinn in particular, just with all the running they had to do.
Yeah, no, I agree that the midfield was problematic. Last but not least, Christine Sinclair, the GOAT, says farewell to Montreal. She comes in at the 68th minute for Chloé Lacasse. What did you think about her game, her last game in Montreal? She didn't play much, but she still showed a few things. Hauled up play. Uh, um, some Lincoln plays that I really liked about her. Even at 40, she's still so good for that team. Elias, what did you think about her performance for the last 20-25 minutes?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a reminder of that. You know that saying where form is temporary, but class is permanent, right? And it's
Love it.
clear that this is not the Christine Sinclair of 10 years ago, but what she cannot do 10 years ago. She shows that composure on the ball. She shows that ability to have everyone take a breath and pick out the right pass. There's a number of times where she was under a lot of pressure. She made one touch and got rid of two defenders, and calmly plays the ball, and kind of finds the open players. Um, yeah, it was a bit disappointing having to see her play more in Canada's half than in Brazil's, which was a bit of a letdown given that it is the last time we'll be seeing her in Montreal. But just seeing her on the field and the confidence she brings and just that aura that she has, where the second she's on the field, everybody just seems to unclench their fists a little, even if it's a tense game and you're suffering a lot defensively. She came on, and for those first 5-10 minutes, the ball was moving better, and everyone just seemed the ball seemed to like play through her, and everything was great. And then the reality of the game and the tactics kind of took hold again. But for those 5-10 minutes, that pendulum swung the other way a bit, and you thought maybe she's gonna pull something out of her hat again one last time. But at the end of the day, it was such a privilege to see her play again one last time, and I think that'll be a very cherished memory. But there's not enough time to talk about all the things you want to talk about Christine
No,
Sinclair,
of
right?
course,
So
of course, of course.
we'll leave it at
But
that.
also, I love the gesture of CF Montreal offering her the jersey number 12. But also at the beginning of the game with Marie-Philippe Poulin, exchanging the jerseys. How important is that? Those little moments uh, when you celebrate such a big player, Alex. How important is that for the fans, but also for the players altogether? Not only Christine Sinclair, but her colleagues on the pitch.
Yeah, I think it was special. I think especially the Marie-Philippe Poulin touch, just because, I mean, yeah, if you grew up over I guess if you've had a chance to follow Canadian sport over the last 15-20 years, like they've provided some of the best individual moments of brilliance between the pair of them. And I think that's huge, just especially from Sinclair's perspective. For all the great that she's done, it feels sometimes like she's been a bit under celebrated in Canada. Like people have always kind of like she's just always been around, and you kind of always like, she'll play forever. And now you're kind of like it's becoming real that like, whoa, like Sinclair. I mean, it's again for those who follow the team closely and know the quieter personality she is, like you're not surprised that something like she literally tried to retire after the Toronto game just because that's her style, like to do things quietly. So I think it's nice, even though she might not, at least she says she might not, enjoy the spotlight as much. I mean, surely you can enjoy moments like that. And I think it's good because she deserves it in the sense that just for so long it's been taken for granted. Also, for a lot of reasons, we haven't had the chance to see her play at home. Like that so many of her best moments have either been way. Like she breaks the record in a small, in an empty stadium in Texas, for example. Like it's, of course, out of our control, but it would have been great if that was in front of a full stadium at BC Place, for example, or etc. So it's nice just to be able to celebrate some moments like that with her. And I think as well, I think an underrated part of this tour, of course, it's great that Toronto sold out, Montreal sold out, Halifax sold out. I think I'd bet a lot of money Victoria is going to sell out, and I think there's a pretty good chance BC Place sells out. It is their
Oh,
hometown, and
that would be great. That would
they
be
have
great.
months to
So
do that. 5 straight sellouts. That's what, like almost 100,000 people in seats just to watch, of course, Sinclair. I think that's good for the team, like you mentioned, because hopefully the same way that a lot of people when they were younger, say at the 2015 World Cup, they fell in love with the Sinclair or Buchanan, who was so great at that 2015 tournament, et cetera, et cetera. Hopefully this is a chance for people to see how world-class the Sheridan is, right? I'm sure a lot of the Montreal crowd, hopefully they left, but, oh, Canada has a goalkeeper who's one of the best in the world, and you kind of don't hear about it much. Hopefully they see someone like Ashley Lawrence, like who was so good in Toronto, for example. Like, oh, that's a world-class player playing for a world-class team, Jesse Fleming, etc. Hopefully they can really just see this generation that's there and support them and push them so that, say, it's so early with all these careers, you're not going to put any pressure on them. But say, one of them goes out and becomes an all-time great, that hopefully we celebrate them the way Sinclair maybe should have been celebrated over the last decade or in plus.
Love it. So we'll see, of course, the remaining games of Christine Sinclair, and we'll talk about them, of course, here on the Ball This Round, as we usually do, and cover the women's national team. Next game is on Tuesday in Halifax, the 31st, on Halloween, 7:30. Canada, Brazil again. It's gonna be an epic show. I think also Canada would want their revenge on home soil against their Brazilian foe. So hopefully we'll see a good game on Tuesday. Moving on, just a small parenthesis. Alex, it seems that in the CPL, the game is played with 11 players against 11, and at the end, Forge wins. What's going on? 4 times out of 5, Forge wins the CPL. When are we going to see something new, and how good are they?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, you could say, Forge dominating the CPL. That would be, it does a disservice, I think, to the job Bobby Smirniotis is doing in particular, and just the culture they've built, because yesterday I was fortunate enough to be at the final in Hamilton. That might be one of the best games I've seen live, at least the best last 30 minutes of the game. The first 90 were a bit, it was a bit sleepy at times, as a final usually is. But I mean, it's just a credit to Forge, because I don't think I've ever seen many teams go down in extra time as they did. Ali Musi for Cavalry scores. Cavalry's been the better team for 100 minutes. Cavalry's had this dream season. They won the regular season title. They got a trophy. They're looking to become the first team to win a double. They're up a goal all of a sudden. You're like, oh, it's over for Forge. No way. Like, they've been on the back foot all game. Tristan Henry bailed them out twice. And then it was weird because Forge just like didn't look bothered. They're like, okay, Cavalry scored. We'll just score ourselves. And that was the whoa, that confidence. Because I think a lot of teams pretend to have that confidence. You don't see it. They're like, oh yeah, they're pretending to be confident, but you see the passes are rushed. The shots are a bit, someone's trying to be the hero. And Forge just kind of went about it. And then they score the 1 goal and you're like, oh, okay, game on. And then, I mean, just the Olympico. I mean, if you haven't had a chance to go watch the highlights, the Olympico to win the game from Tristan Borges, which by the way, he meant. That's the funniest thing. People say, oh, bad goalkeeping, yada, yada, yada. I don't want to hear any of that, because Tristan Borges scored an Olympico from that same corner flag 4 years ago. I'll give him the benefit of the doubt that he meant it again, considering he's already done it in the game. So yeah, overall, it was just a super amazing game, and credit to Forge, because I think they easily could have folded and Cavalry wins, and it's a whole different narrative. And that's why Smirniotis, this is someone who's getting looked at by the men's national team. That's why TFC interviewed him last year. That's why Montreal interviewed him before Lasada came in. He deserves all that interest and then some.
Interesting. And Robbie saying, of course, some great goals in that game. And as Alex said, that Olympico is really a joy to see. Really, I saw that and I'm like, no, he didn't. He didn't do that in the final. But it's so beautiful. As Paul Vance used to say, the ball is round, so anything can happen. Exactly what happened in the CPL final. Moving on, things happened here in CF in Montreal with CF Montreal having that end of year presser. As usual, we were expecting some drama. And you know what? We weren't disappointed. Elias, you were there for the ball is round, for the Canadian press, of course, but also for the ball is round. So I'll let you go with the whole show and tell us all about it.
It still feels like a fever dream, just because you kind of everybody went into it being like, yes, this is, you give out the club awards and you give out, the the top players from the team will speak, and it's all very an orderly fashion, and nobody thought that Victor Wanyama was going to get to speak, because not only was there bad blood, but he didn't play, right? The last dozen games of the season, he started once, he came off the bench twice, he played a total of like 115 minutes in the final run to the postseason. So all those things considered, nobody thought he was going to speak. Lo and behold, after the awards were announced and they said who was speaking, you kind of heard Victor Wanyama's name and you go, did they speak to him? Because nobody knew what was going to happen. It was one of the most tense situations I've ever been in a press conference room, or in a press in one of those situations, because this was literally a soap opera. But first you have to have the PR, and you have to have the award winner. So first off was Mathieu Choinière. He came out. He was the club MVP, the Giuseppe Sapporo Trophy winner. I don't think anybody was surprised by that. Halfway through the season, people already started locking their votes as Mathieu Choinière for MVP, given just how he really was the only silver lining in that disastrous beginning of the season. He carried the momentum during that very impressive run of home wins, and just overall everyone expected okay, this shine is eventually going to drop off. And he kind of talked about it in his media availability. He talked about, like, the second preseason started, he had this feeling that this was going to be a year, right? And that kind of confidence coming from someone who had never been a starter, let alone the guy on a team, is genuinely impressive. Because there was also this feeling from everyone in attendance of the preseason training sessions that he was, a man on the mission. He won the beep test, for example, the shuttle test, however you know it as. It's a terrible cardio test, but he won the whole thing by like a solid minute at least to the next best player. And I think he could have kept going. I think he stopped out of boredom, because he stopped running and he just walked to the bench. I think he was just, what, I'm getting
It's
kind of bored.
it's so funny, Elias, because at one point, CF Montreal fans were saying that Mathieu Choinière doesn't have the physicality needed to play in MLS, and that was
And they were
2 years
right.
ago. And they were
They were
right.
right, though.
But that's
Yeah, he
how
did a lot
that's
of
how
growing.
much he worked on it, and that's how much he succeeded in that work by being so dominant physically. It's unbelievable. This player is really unbelievable on the pitch, and playing also multiple positions very well. Also, being able to excel not only in the midfield, not only as a number 8, but also as a number 10, also as a right wing back, also as a left wing back. That takes a lot on a player, and you need that IQ in order to play that well in so many positions. And that's what's really interesting about Mathieu Choinière. We'll not do a post-mortem of him, because we'll do it in another episode. But today, I think it was very interesting to see him win, the trophy, the Giuseppe Saputo trophy of the season. I think very well deserved, right, Alex?
It very well deserved, absolutely. And the thing is, I wanted to ask Alex about just the
Yeah, go
fact that,
ahead.
yes, it's always good to see a midfielder win and get his desserts. But not only was he, I think without the goal contributions, he would have won the MVP regardless. I think that on top of him being the best player, what does that say about the club that he was also their leading goal scorer and the most goal contributions. Yes, that is also a red flag, but I kind of want to get your take from it because why is your number 8 also your most productive offensive outlet?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that says a lot because Montreal's attack was, I mean, is anemic.
Non-existent.
I was gonna say, I feel like anemic is too weak of a word, and usually that's about as strong as you get for the attack. Yeah, so for Chouanier, yeah, it's a tough one because I think from a Canadian perspective, by the way, I mean, like, I'm so happy that he made his debut against Japan, like, so well deserved. Like had he mentioned, like you mentioned, Elias, like he did everything. Like every time I watched Montreal games, like he's everywhere. Like it's the fitness, it's the physical, but then also like tactically, technically, like he's so smart. He's always like in the right position, which is always underrated. But then on the ball, he added some things to his repertoire. Like I think of that goal he scored from well outside the box. I think it was a few weeks ago. You're like, whoa, where did that? Like I don't
Portland.
think he scores that goal a few years ago. Some of the assists, like he was just the complete package. So I think it's something where you don't want to take away from that just because I think, again, no matter what the situation with Montreal, I think it's growing. I think even like under Nancy, he was still a very key piece under Nancy. It's just like, again, part of the reason why Nancy team did so well is that you had Mihailovic, Kyoto firing, you had Johnston, right? And obviously all those guys are either gone or injured in the case of Kyoto, and that clearly showed. But yeah, I think it does say a lot about Montreal that offensively he did so much. And I think that's good for him to show that he can step up and do that. But yes, ideally, as you see across MLS teams that do well, you need number 9s putting the ball in the back of the net. You need number 10s, feeding them. You need some goal contribute. Like in an ideal world, a Mathieu Chouanier is the team's 3rd or 4th best goal scorer. Great story, but you got other guys, like they say, like you guys would say, qui livre la marchandise, right? And, unfortunately, I guess there wasn't that for Montreal.
No, not at all. And I think that that we talked about how Mathieu Chouanier's potential leaving for or taking that next step in his career, but there's box to box midfielders everywhere in the world, and that just a pure box to box may not be something that English clubs are looking for. And the like of Ishmael Koenig, who brought that attacking player in that conference in the final third, that was something. Now Mathieu Chouanier, who definitely delivered the goods going forward, could be someone that European clubs take a look at and go, that could be a very, very interesting thing. That being said, during the presser, he recommitted to, staying in Montreal for as long as, for the foreseeable future. And Hady, what exactly is his ceiling within the club right now? This is within the club standing. How much potential is there, and what is his ceiling in Montreal?
I think he needs to develop a bit more his personality, his communication. Also, sometimes he's a bit, in the pressers, I feel that he's a bit too shy. He needs to take a bigger role in his communication. That's something that he needs to learn. He needs to be the big brother, and he's not the young brother anymore. He is the big brother of those players. He's 24 now, going on 25 pretty soon, if I'm not mistaken. He's not old, but he's not that young player anymore. He should be able to develop his persona in a certain way in the dressing room, and that's where he needs to grow. Because on the pitch, he's doing it all. If he develops his persona a bit more, if he becomes a bit meaner, a bit more vicious, I think that will help his game in a certain way, because right now he's the good boy. He's the one that really works a lot, but he needs that bit of viciousness in order to I don't know, in my opinion, to really go even, bring it up a notch in a certain way.
Well, I mean, speaking of viciousness, someone like Jonathan Sirois, who we're going to segue into now, who won the Defensive Player of the Year award, he acknowledged that he would be the secondary at the beginning of the season, but he kind of kicked the door and said, "I'm here to stay, right? Even if it is at the backup, I am going to be, a reliable backup, and I'm not waiting around anymore. My position is in this club." I don't think anybody could have expected that if at the beginning of the season, if you told anybody that Jonathan Sirois is not only going to take the starting spot, but also break the club record for clean sheets and finish second in the league with 11, I think they would have laughed you out of the room. But it's exactly what he did. And, this is kind of crazy considering that 12 months ago, he lost his starting job at Valor. And Alex, he's becoming the poster boy for CPL loans that come back to MLS clubs and not just show development, but show them so much more well-rounded as professional players. What do you think that it is about the CPL that is kind of encouraging these younger players? Because we've seen it work in the case of Jean Dossier. Why we've also seen it not work so well. An immediate example is Sean Rea, who had the season of his life, and then all of a sudden kind of fell off the face of the earth with the club. So CPL, as far as creating professional players, and we've seen it. What's the next step for players who are on loan in that league looking to kind of break into MLS?
Wow, I mean, it's a great question. I think what's key is what we're learning is the importance of minutes. I think that's really the big thing. I think when you're anywhere from 15 to 23, it's minutes. Because for every scenario, like a guy like a Mathieu Chouanier who maybe didn't have the minutes, and also in his case, he had injuries and he breaks through later. There's tens and dozens of other guys who fall into the abyss and don't become a Chouanier, right? So I think as you see with Sirois, I think it just pays off to get the minutes, the reps that he got at Valor. I think it hardened him. You can tell, like the fact that, like you mentioned, he lost his spot at the end to Rayan Yesley. Perhaps that was also Valor kind of planning for the future a bit as well and being like, all right, well, Sirois technically isn't our player for next year, and Yesley is, so let's see what we got. But even for Sirois, that kind of stuff teaches you where you're the guy in 2021. You win a goalkeeper of the year. You show your talent. You show that you're clearly someone that at that age to win the goalkeeper of the year was fantastic. And then by the end of the next season, you're on the bench. That teaches you as well. So I think it's good to harden like on one side, like the reality of the professional. Someone like Sean Rea. I mean, that's a whole other one with how he was handled by Losada. I don't necessarily fully agree with that, just because I think at Valor you saw he learned a lot. Like I was fascinating because chatting to Phil DeSantos about it, he talks so much about the work he had Rea doing off the ball, all that stuff. I think you can grow a lot, but all that to say, I think minutes are so important. You got to get minutes, and perhaps in Rea's situation, I think what hurt him is that he maybe didn't have that segue, because I think it is a lot to ask to be like, all right, you're the guy on a CPL team, come and go be the guy on an MLS team, go replace Mihailovic. Like that's just so unfair to ask it for someone to be like, go replace him. It can be okay, slowly replace him. You can learn the ropes, and maybe in an ideal world, Mihailovic was still around to teach a Sean Rea, but that obviously didn't end up being the case. But for Sirois, I think it showed just that he was able to hop in and get those minutes right away. That those 2 years he spent at Valor really helped. And yeah, I guess really the big step, and I think we're seeing as well, I see it a lot at Vancouver, is how do you get that next step? Because I think we saw with Krifa Yao as well. I feel like that's something where the Whitecaps, they didn't get as much out of Krifa Yao as they should have. And a big problem was finding those minutes for that player, because as you saw with the Waterman, you get guys the minutes, eventually they're going to grow. So I think all that to say, you got to get minutes, and you have to figure out how. For the Whitecaps case, MLS Next Pro is proving to be a ground where that's helped. But obviously, as we know in Montreal, that isn't the case, and that's perhaps something.
You're opening a Pandora box now.
I know what I'm doing here. I know what I'm doing with that one.
Now,
also shout out Ryan Yesley, also
Yeah.
Montreal product, Quebec soccer product, PLSQ with Blainville, and obviously winning that title. So shout out Ryan Yesley.
Yeah.
Hady, we've seen just how much he's grown over the season,
Yeah.
but at the same time, 2 key mistakes are going to stick out this season for Chantal Sirois. The first one coming in the Canadian Championship final against Vancouver, coming out of your box, no need for that, leading to the first goal. Again, against Cincinnati, rushing out to kind of get that cross, causing a penalty. There's no penalty there. Montreal ends up with 43 points, and they make the playoffs, and they're the 8th seed, and they're hosting a play-in game. Yes, he is young. How much leeway does he get, right, for mistakes like that in situations that important? And does it Hernan Losada think twice about having him in such important games when, he's made mistakes like that next year?
Love the question. Love the question. And I think
Love putting you on the spot.
you made sure to ask me that question. Guys,
Of course,
play
you're
the
back, so we got to
youth.
hit you right away.
Play youth. This is normal. It's his first year at MLS level as a starting goalkeeper. He's going to make key mistakes, and that's completely normal. What I don't want to see is the same mistakes being made next year. This year was his year one. This year, he did so many good things. For a year one, you can't expect more from a young goalkeeper. He had 11 shutouts this year. He made sure that he took the place, the number one spot from James Pentemis, and also he had some discussions with Mauro Biello and the men's national team about a potential call up for the men's national team. What more can you ask for from a first year goalkeeper? First year goalkeeper, of course, in MLS, not professionally, but in MLS. Mistakes are going to happen. That's completely normal. But you know what? If you don't make those mistakes, you don't learn from them because you're not making them. So right now, he needs to learn from those mistakes. He needs to make sure that he's concentrated a bit more. He needs to make sure that during those high pressure games, he's able to withstand those kinds of pressures and make sure that he's able to take the right decisions when he's confronted by the same plays and the same adversity in the future games. And you know what? It's normal. It's a learning curve. That's how you learn. That's how you grow. And you know what? Next year, if he makes the same kind of mistakes, I'll be a bit more mean and hard on him because right now there's nothing, but nothing we can say about Jonathan Sirois. Nothing bad we can say about Jonathan Sirois because nobody even dreamt of seeing him, perform that well for his first year in MLS.
Well, the next player up was Victor Wanyama. And when he entered the press area, you could honestly hear a pin drop. Everyone was like, "Oh my god, what is going to happen?" And I genuinely don't think Wanyama knew what he was going to say, just because of the entire situation and the way he answered the questions. It was probably one of the most quietly explosive interviews I had ever seen because he looked like someone that had just been really just disappointed and almost defeated by his situation.
Yeah.
And he outlined a lot of things, but the main thing was that he talked about how he wasn't given any instructions or given any explanations or any reason as to why he wasn't getting his minutes. Something that Losada denied right away, right? And he said, like, I told him in front of witnesses, and look, I'm not going to get into the he said, she said of it all. All I want to know is when your club, the player who stepped up as captain for 2 months while Samuel Piet was injured and who carried the midfield on his back during that time, but also was such a crucial part of your team's greatest ever regular season. How does the road back how does the road back look? Because is this something that is fundamentally broken and can never be repaired? Or is there a way that Losada and Victor Wanyama can kind of coexist in this state of incredibly heightened tension? I want to hear about this from both of you, but how could they possibly coexist in the same ecosystem?
They can't. It's as simple as that. They just can't. I'm sorry, but you can't come up in front of cameras, bash your coach, and then expect to come back next season and say, "Hey, I'm here," and your coach come back and say, "Hey, yeah, I'm happy that you're back." It's just not going to happen. I think it's the end for one of them, and I'll be, we'll talk about it a bit later. I'm pretty sure, but I have pretty clear idea of who's going to be the one that will be leaving. But honestly, I Okay, I'm gonna go into a sort of conspiracy theory in a certain way
I
because
love it.
I
I
love
love
that.
it.
Uh, Honestly, okay, don't you think it's a kind of strategy from CF Montreal to put Victor Wanyama here to just lay the grounds for a future firing of their head coach? I'm sorry, but like it feels that way. Like, why did you give him the mic, knowing that he hasn't been playing? His wife bashed the coach on social media, and then you give him the mic in the end of your presser. Like for me, that's to put pressure on Hernandez Lara. It's as simple as that. And it's a theory that I've been thinking of, but honestly, I don't understand the strategy behind it. So for me, no, there's no way back for Victor Wanyama and Losada. I just don't see it. I don't know if Alex agrees, but I don't see it.
I seriously struggle to see it just because I think it would have happened already. Just because it happened, like it's one thing for Wanyama not to play halfway through the season, but the fact that no point there was a resolution where I think the thing for me that was the most jarring is okay, it's one thing for Lasada and Wanyama to fall out, but Wanyama becomes a 30-minute bench player every game. I think that would have been like, I think you could have come back from that. And the fact that he went from completely like your only DP, like, this again, we have to, this isn't Europe. We have to, like, again, this isn't Europe. This isn't something where you can fall out with anyone you want because you just get rid of them, you move on to the next player, you start fresh. Like, this is something where you follow with the DP that has bigger implications, right? Especially on a Montreal team that only has one DP. This, like, look, I don't like the way Sean Reyes' situation is handled, but that can happen just because, again, that's someone who's on the bottom end of the roster. You're only making 50K a year. You can clean up that problem a lot easier than, say, this Victor Wanyama situation. So yeah, I think it's one where there was a road to it, like they crossed the line too far for it to be fixed, right? I think it's something where the fact that he went completely out of the squad, just because in MLS, that's you can't afford it. You frankly can't afford it, and we'll see. I would say, yeah, one of them would have to be gone, and the fact that, yeah, it is fascinating that a guy like Wanyama got put out and aired it out, because I think it's something where if he was gone, you can kind of just like let him go quietly, let him, just end the contract and move on. So there's kind of no reason for Montreal to let him go.
So you're agreeing with me. You're
I am
agreeing
agreeing
with
with
me.
you.
So you
I'm
like my
completely
conspiracy
baffled.
theory.
Well, I don't know, but again, yeah, I guess we can say, but yeah, it just feels extremely strange because, like, it feels like a line. Like, again, you can't see both of them working together, and at that point, especially in MLS, whether a DP, it feels like it's easier to side with the DP because you can get a new head coach. I think you can. It's not like, again, to Lasada, like it's not like, this isn't like a Wilfred like if it would be different to, again, to sorry to bring up the lost son in Wilfred Nancy, but if it was Wilfred Nancy versus Victor Wanyama, that's almost a different situation just because Nancy had the results to back it up, whereas now, especially you look at the results not being there for Lazada, you look at the past history with DC United, like I think it would be a lot easier to look at that and maybe say, okay, Lazada, you've had your time in Montreal, whereas just as well, especially the fact that it's Wanyama, the DP.
I agree.
We will get into the Losada of it all a bit more in depth just in a moment. But the next player up, in a similar vein, but his beef is not with the coach; it's with the administration. It's Romel Kyoto, who has been, especially in the last few years, has been the most reliably unreliable attacker at the club. Right, every time he is healthy, he is a rock star at his. If he could spend an entire year fully fit, he is one of those dark horses for even an MVP or at the very least an all-star nomination. Um, his contract is up. He makes $1 million now with the updated MLS pay scale. And up until recently, nobody at the club had spoken to him about an extension or a renewal. There were talks last off season, and then the club kind of said, we'll figure it out next year. And since then, nothing has happened. And according to Kyoto, he's kind of sick and tired, and he basically just said, "I'm going back to Honduras. If they want me, they know where to find me." Now, we've seen this pattern. We've seen it happen several times. We've seen it happen with Victor Wanyama. We've seen it happen with Rudy Camacho just in the last, year or two. This is kind of a pattern that CF Montreal have. Do you think that word travels around MLS, and word travels very quickly? And I'm sure that the players talk to one another whenever there's some kind of opportunity at a new club. Do you think that Montreal might be gaining a reputation as one of those clubs that is difficult to deal with off the field when it comes to contract problems?
Oh wow. I don't. I don't. No, I don't agree with that. The reason behind this is because Montreal now is known to be that club that really pushes their players to go, like, being a stepping stone for players going to
Okay.
Europe. So it's kind of, in a way, we can't say that they're so good as being a stepping stone, but they're also not good in, dealing with end of year contract. You deserve a contract. Did Ramel Kyoto deserve a contract? No, this year he didn't. He doesn't deserve a contract because he didn't play. And even if he was injured, we haven't seen him in Montreal for how many months? Like for
It was
6
formal.
months, he wasn't even in Montreal. We saw, stories on Instagram, him having fun, him being in Miami, him being in Honduras. What the hell, man? You have your whole team and your whole teammates really fighting for a spot in the playoffs, fighting their lives. Why aren't you with them? Why? Okay, you know what? You took a leave. Okay, that's good. That's normal. You asked for a leave, you got it. Okay, just be a bit more discreet on social media. Just work your way out of your re-educate yourself. Try to be a team player in a certain way. That's the first thing. The second thing, you come to Montreal, he's not even fit. And we saw it at the end of the season. He wasn't even fit on the field because you saw him. If Romel Kyoto was ready, like 60% ready or 70% ready, he would have given a lot more than what he gave in the last few games of the season. But unfortunately, we saw a Romel Kyoto that was 20 or 30% ready, in my opinion. So no, he doesn't deserve a contract right now. And if he gets offered a contract, it's going to be a contract where he's not even going to be a top player, in my opinion.
Alex,
And you know what?
if
That's my opinion. Go ahead.
But Alex, if Romel Kyoto said it like straight away, right? His priority is to come back to Montreal. He clearly loves the city. He's got 514 tattooed on him, right? So there is still a love of the city. The fans obviously share that love. If you're the club, what kind of contract are you offering? Because it's very clear that they're if they are to resign him, it won't be for $1 million a year. That's brutally clear. But Kyoto does have certain expectations. The club has probably significantly lower expectations in terms of salary. What kind of meeting point do you think makes both parties happy, if there even is one?
Yeah, I mean, that one's tough to say because I think based on what we saw of Kyoto's age, the injury history, just, the last few seasons, it's hard to say much over 500, 600,000. Even feels like, I'd say probably a range where you probably have the best chance of meeting Kyoto, what he would want. And then still I think for Montreal, anything more than the 600,000 would be pushing it. So yeah, I'd probably put it in that range, but it's tough because I mean, I think at this point, if Montreal hasn't engaged in talks in it already, I feel like the writing's kind of on the wall.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, I feel like maybe perhaps they could have gone to him a bit earlier with an idea of what things look like. So we'll see on that one, but I'd say 500, 600K. If you had to ask me a number is what I'd put it.
Yeah, and Patrick is agreeing with you. 500K to be a super sub with 1
Isn't
year
that what Lassie
plus
Lapalainen
club
is right
option.
now? Lassie Lapalainen is basically a $500,000 super sub, right?
Yeah,
When he's healthy.
and he's more than
So
that. No, he's a top player.
He's
last
like,
season?
I think he's like 600. I think he's like 600.
I don't remember.
Man,
I don't remember. Ah,
in
that's
that ballpark, right?
oh,
In
yeah.
that ballpark, like if they can get even 10 goals out of, if they can get even like 20
Uh,
games out of him, let alone 10 goals, then I think he's worth bringing back to the club just because he does tend to gel well with the younger attackers, and we saw it,
yeah.
right? Those young attackers had to kind of do all this learning on their own with no big brother there. The oldest
Uh,
attacker, other than Remote Kyoto, was, I believe, Chinonzo Ofora, who's 23. So I think, or is it Mason Toy? Sorry, who's 26, right? So there's not a lot of age there, not a lot of experience. So if someone like, we're talking about Sean Rea, who doesn't really have that big brother on his team. Same goes for a lot of the attackers who kind of had to be thrown into the deep end with no floaties and very clearly are still kind of figuring out how to swim. The last player we're going to talk about is the captain, Samir Piet. He kind of blew up after Montreal's, what was it, 3-0 or 4-0 loss to Atlanta. Kind of slammed the tactics, slammed the everything. Just said that team's not there. Atlanta's light years away. It was a very it was kind of a precursor to just how tense this end of season would be between the players and the manager. He didn't double down, but he didn't also walk back what he said in his end of year presser. He pretty much reaffirmed it that he believes
yeah.
that this team tactically is not as sound, and you know he's not out of line. We've seen it a number of times. While we talk about how good this team is at home and how poor they are on the road, but at the same time, not only are the players poor on the road, we've seen Hernan Losada kind of trip over himself tactically. We've seen him do some really nice adjustments and
Yeah.
substitutions at home, and then on the road, it's a completely different Hernan Losada.
Yeah.
Your takeaway from some of Piet's comments, because this is the heart of your team. This is the heart of your
Yeah.
midfield right now, especially with no Victor Wanyama. If you have the heart of your midfield and arguably the face of your team saying these things, what kind of compromise does the captain, who has regular meetings with the coach, what do you think he wants more out of the tactics? Because it seems like Losada's tried a variety of things, none of which have worked on the road.
He said quite a few things that are very interesting, Samuel Piet. First of all, he said that like the tactical, like the team, the way it was set up, it didn't really put the qualities of the squad forward in a certain way. It wasn't adapted to the squad that's available for the club, and that's for me is very concerning. Like in a way, he's bashing his coach again. Okay. Second of all, then he said that his personal relationship with the coach was great, and he loved working with him, and there's no problem whatsoever. So personally, but he also said, but I know that it's not the same for other players. So again, that for me, even if it personally is going well, he still mentioned that it didn't go well for other players. So it's still your team captain saying there's problems tactically and between the coach and other players, and I don't think it looks good. And I think it's at one point, the coach has to have his own ideas, but also he needs to make sure that his core, his main players, the captains, because Wanyama was a captain on the pitch too, so they're hurt in a certain way, and I have a feeling that they weren't hurt. So for me, that's what I see from Piet. That's the two takeaways that I took from Piet's comments, which for me are again him bashing the head coach.
Now, Alex, one of the big things that came with Losada from DC was his man management, right? That was one of the big things that there was a lot of questions, a lot of concerns about. I want to kind of pivot towards Vancouver Whitecaps head coach Vanni Sartini, who is arguably one of the best man managers in MLS right now, right? All his players seem to love him. He seems to really inspire his players and kind of get the best out of them, not just tactically, but emotionally and on that end. What can managers like Hernan Losada learn from, Vanny's coaching style?
Yeah, I mean it's a great question. I think the big thing is just the importance of, I mean, the whole roster. I think that's something what that can go a long way. Just having that confidence in your whole roster. I think we've seen now teams are at their best when, of course, players 1 to 11 are important, but if you can get players 12 to 23 on board, that's going to help a lot because MLS is rough. Like it's Saturday, Wednesday, Saturday, Wednesday, Saturday, Wednesday all year long. You got Leagues Cup. If you're fortunate enough to play in Champions Cup, you got extra fixtures there. You've got Canadian Championship. It's brutal, and you need your whole squad to buy in. And I think having belief in your whole squad goes a long way. The willingness to turn and look there, and then just also I think knowing what works for players, just knowing that the modern player is different. I think that's something I hear a lot from coaches is that you can't have the same approach with all players, and some players just need a bit of coddling, some players need some tough love, and I think it's finding that balance between it. And again, especially in MLS, where again you have to remember the rosters are so unique. Like you have to pick your battles as well. Like for example, and for Montreal, the fact that you can't have a Wanyama situation just because this isn't Europe. You can't just throw them out the back door and then move on to the next. Like there's ramifications to it. There's salary caps to think about. There's DPs, all of that. So from what I've learned from Vanny, it's that importance of the 1 to 23, getting everyone to buy in, and as well, I think the importance of competition and training. I think just building that up so that players. I think a great example of someone this year who's really shown in that is Ryan Raposo. He's someone where, especially lately, he's been playing his best football over the last 2 months after the Whitecaps signed Adekougbe and Leray. Everyone thought it was over, because Raposo was starting, oh yeah, no chance he's going to start anymore. Adekougbe and Leray are coming in, and he's pushing them. He's genuinely playing to a similar level to them and forcing Vanny to think, okay, do I start Adekougbe, Raposo, or Leray? And I think that shows that that's a player that's believed in. That's a player that wants to play to the best of his abilities, and you need to do that in MLS. You need to get the most of everyone, especially because the unique schedule, the unique roster, et cetera, et cetera.
That's actually a really good segue into our Losada portion, if you will, because he talked about the players that played well and the players that didn't play well, and he's made it very clear that this is his starting 11. And yes, there's maybe some tweaks here and there, who plays at striker or who plays, at left back, stuff like that. But, of the starting 11, 9 have been pretty much locked in at any given moment. Do you think that, maybe, like you said, with the fact that, you have to pay attention to your guys 12 to 23, do you think maybe he's leveraged himself a bit too much in going, these are the guys that are going to get me the best results, but he's almost alienated, the other people that may not be perfect for his system? And when the realities of MLS, travel, fatigue, injuries, especially Montreal injuries, start to set in, do you think that he's gonna have trouble going to his bench and going to those other guys to kind of get the most out of him?
It feels like it. It certainly does. And I think I can get where he's coming from, because as a coach, that can be the easier option, but you also have to know what you're working with, because the Seattle Sounders can get away with that approach, for example. Like they've got a very good 11. They know what's that. Like every week that it's going to be Morris, Roldan, João Paulo, Lodero. And it's also, it works for them because those players, are also a clear cut above. They know the standard. They play consistently every week. So I think for Montreal's perspective, it is interesting that Losada's been so set on an 11, just because I think the two things, his 11 isn't as strong as Wilfred Nancy's 11 was. So it's not like he has some of those pillars to rely on that Nancy had. And I think the fact that even Nancy was so willing to go to his depth shows that, okay, even he kind of realized that for as good as Montreal was last year, it was more because of the sum of their parts, right? Like they were just as good as Mihailovic starting, but when Zachary Bogiar came off the bench and scored 5 goals, 5 assists, they were also just as good as that. And I think the fact that Losada kind of went all in on, more of an 11, and they kind of struggled, it kind of shows. I feel like Montreal's got a deep team. I'm looking at this Montreal team. I'm looking at areas of need. I'm looking, okay, up front, 100%. I'm looking maybe at a number 10. Other than that, maybe some midfield depth, or maybe not midfield depth, maybe a new starting midfielder, maybe and a left wing back. Other than that, I see a good team, but the depth is already there, and the fact that he hasn't leaned on what is arguably their strength, looking at this roster, that's something, because as a coach, you have to play to their strengths, and he hasn't done that. So, long-winded answer. That's probably how I'd feel about it.
Now, Hady, you got something to add? Absolutely, yeah.
I just want to say just one last thing. Yeah, I really feel that he alienated the rest of the team 100%. I think that's the right word, because at one point, even if some players came off the bench and played well, the following game they weren't in the starting 11, and we saw it a few times. Ahmed Hamdi had a few good spells at one point, and we haven't seen him in the starting 11. We saw even every time we used to see even Sunusi. It took, I think, 3, 4, 5 games where he came in, where he did something well, for him to get a spot in the starting 11. It took a lot of time, and I feel that Hernando Sada is someone that was very hesitant in making changes to his starting 11. Not hesitant at all to make changes during the game, and he had some very good games where he was able to really handle the game and make the right changes during the game. But changing his starting 11 wasn't his strong suits, in my opinion.
Yeah. Now, with all of this, everything the players have said, everything we've seen, both man manager wise and tactically, just barely missing on the playoffs, right, by 2 points. Do you think that he's done enough to at least earn the benefit of the doubt that allow him to start the season next year? Or do you think that it's better for Olivier Renard and the group to kind of just cut their losses and start looking for a new manager as soon as possible?
Okay, before I answer, I think everybody knows my answer. I'm just going to give you pros and cons. Okay, let's go with pros and cons with Hernando Sada. Okay, communication of Hernando Sada was really, really, really good. The fact that he was able, with the media, I love his answer. I love the way he was conducting himself in media availabilities and everything. That's amazing. The way he handled his communication with the fans was really amazing. He was really loved by all the fans off the pitch. Okay, so he was great at that. He was able to develop some players. I think Nathan Saliba is really the symbol of what he was able to do. And also Mathieu Choinière, as Alex said a bit earlier, Hernando Zada made him that star player in the team. It was because of Hernando Zada that we saw Mathieu Choinière get a call up with the men's national team, because he was the man of Hernando Zada's system. So there are a few pros. Also, Jonathan Sirois, a lot of people were saying when James Pantemis was injured that, Montreal should sign a more experienced goalkeeper. And no, he was like, you know what? Let's start Jonathan Sirois. And then he stuck with him, and which is not something that's easy to do, to stick with the 22-year-old goalkeeper that is playing his first year in MLS. So that's the pros for Hernando Zada. Now let's look at the cons. And we have a question here from Tate. If you play Victor Wanyama in the second half of the season, who do you not play? That's your job as a coach, to make sure that you do a rotation between your young prospects like Nathan Saliba and your veterans, your only VP, like Alex said a bit earlier with Victor Wanyama, and your leader and your real captain, which is Samuel Piette, and the pride of Quebec. Okay, so it's your job to make sure that you give enough playing time for those players, and that's only in the midfield. I'm not even talking about the rest of the squad. why haven't we seen Torkelson during the whole season? At one point, we had to play Jabang and now Torkelson. Torkelson has been with the club for 2 years. Now, yeah, he was injured at one point, but he wasn't injured the whole season. What about Sean Rea? Yes, of course. You know what? He made a few. He wasn't very happy when he got subbed off at one point. He's young, man. Just grow up, Hernando Sada. Like, you know what? Yes, okay. You just, put him aside for 2-3 games and then you put him back in the mix. Because at one point, you need your team to play and to win. Okay? Again, you see players like Mason Toy. I understand that Mason Toy wasn't good. But at one point, you need to score goals. Chinonso 4 is not scoring goals. Nobody's scoring goals for you as strikers. You have Mason Toy that has a bit of experience. Play him. Just give him 10 minutes here, 15 minutes there. That's how you build a team. And lastly, unfortunately, I think that tactically, Hernando Sada is not flexible enough. And it took him, I think, 2/3 of the season to realize that he doesn't have a number 10 that can make a difference. It took him 2/3 of the season. Like, it should take him 10 games at most 10 games, 8 to 10 games. It took him 2/3 of the season. He tried everybody as a number 10. I understand that's your preferred formation, but that's not, you don't have that player that can make the difference. So at one point, you have to change things up. And again, yes, we look at the results. Yes, he's only 2 points away from the playoffs. Completely agree with that. But I'm sorry, about 10 games before the end of the season, Montreal was not even fighting for the 8th spot. They were able to fight for the 7th and the 6th and the 5th spot. So in the last 10 to 12 games of the season, he completely lost the team tactically, on the pitch and off the pitch, because that's when the problems really started. And I don't have the stats in front of me right now, but I think that the points that we were able to win in the last 12 games of the season were so few that unfortunately that's exactly what really, hurt the team. And a coach needs to be able to rally his team around him in the final stretch. And he wasn't able to do that. So, yeah, a lot of pros, but a lot more cons, in my opinion.
Well, one person that does agree with you. One person that does agree with you is Olivier Renard, right? The first question he was asked was, do you think that, were you impressed with the season? No. Do you think if they made the playoffs, he still would have the same answer, right? Not only he doesn't care if they had made the play-in, he was not impressed with the way the team went about their business. Olivier Renard is someone who, much like Hernando Sada, sticks to his guns. He has a vision about how this club should be run, and he also has a vision about how these players should be playing. There's a reason that he brought in someone like Bryce Duke, who doesn't necessarily fit Losada's style. There's a reason someone like Mahalo Opoku was brought in, despite Losada playing with 2 strikers and a 10 and not a winger, even though Mahala is a natural winger. And we saw him a couple games play on the wing where he was excellent, right? But Losada played much more almost as in a rocket ship, right? Where it's just, very geared towards finding the ball in the middle of the field, getting vertical. So just how big do you think the disconnect between these players and, Losada's style is? And how important is it for them to get on the same page this offseason? Because do you think that Losada will have a bigger say on who gets brought in this offseason, given the fact that I think there's probably a better understanding about how Losada ball works, and Olivier Renard can then maybe tune his filters, and maybe, his research is more geared towards people that'll fit in his system as opposed to finding, the next Georgi Mihailovic?
I'd say that's the only way for this to work, because look, I think it's something where if we're looking at all what we see, I mean, there's a lot of good arguments for Losada to be relieved, and you could also make good arguments for him to stay. What I'll say is, I've noticed a lot over the last few years. I'm of the team of letting MLS managers get at least 2 years, just because I think a lot of times year one's always messy for whatever reason. Like the squad maybe isn't what you want. You're still figuring things out. You're still figuring out what you got. Like there's so many coaches where you can go countless where they have year one, it's a bit quiet. Year two, they really go off. So I think if Lasada is to stay, yes, him and Renard have to be absolutely on the same page. Like as brutal as it is, if Lasada is staying, then Wanyama has to go, right? I think, like we said, we said something has to give in that situation. Then, if you're going to back your manager, clearly he didn't get along with Wanyama. He has to go, and then you have to go find him some DPs that fit. You have to, if he wants to be a more top heavy team, get him some top heavy players, right? Get him more of a number 9 that you can rely on just to eat minutes, hopefully get some goals, be consistent. Go get some players that can be like, what Chouanier was for the most part, just minute munchers, right? Get him those guys that he wants. Because like I mentioned earlier, again, I feel like what Montreal's strengths were before, their depth, the defending, scoring by committee, all those sorts of things. We saw none of that this year. They didn't play to those strengths. And part of that's also on the manager, and part of that's on Olivier Renard. So I think if Renard is going to stick with what we've seen from him over the last few years and kind of stick to that approach of, okay, it's going to be a bit more relying on your depth, getting young guys from the academy, being more of a collective, it's hard to say that Lasada is the right guy for the job. Then if you're Renard and you're like you say, steadfast with your belief, lean into it. Get a new coach. There's a lot of coaches out there. That's the beauty of having a sporting director, where you have that power of finding a coach that fits your vision. If not, if you're going to back Lasada, then give him what he wants, and then if it flames out, then at least you went out and tried that. So that's kind of how I'd feel on that in that regard. That it really is going to have to come down to Renard and Lasada either getting on the same page, or if Renard wants to be stubborn, there's no problem with that. But then that means making the hard decision of finding a coach after just 1 year.
You know what? I agree with you usually about, at least give 2 years to a coach. The only problem is that it's not a golden rule, in my opinion, because the way the season has gone this year, it started not very well. Then it was really good for a stretch of for maybe 10, 15 games. And then it was a clear drop until the end of the season. And for me, Lasada completely lost the dressing room. It's not like Nancy, where in his first year, at the end of the season, you saw something was forming, or Henri at the end of the season, you saw that something was going on. That I understand. Give him another season. But here we saw the team completely lose their focus and just completely disband in a certain way. They weren't even playing as a team anymore. And that's, for me, is very concerning. You can either remove the head coach, or at that point, I completely agree with you, Alex, you have to relieve Victor Wanyama, but not only him, but a lot more players around Victor Wanyama that has, Romel Kyoto, and you're going to have to remove at least 10, 15 players and just change your whole squad in a certain way, because you need to play, as you said, a bit Elias, Lasada ball. You need to have players that fit within the system of Lasada. So I think we're at a crossroads right now where Olivier Renard is going to have to choose between the team or the coach. And we'll see what the decision is going to be.
Right. I'm going to end this little segment. One word answer from both of you. CF Montreal has the exact same season in terms of play style, in terms of momentum, sort of good things and bad things, but they finish in 7th. They don't have to worry about the play, and they finish in 7th place. Is Lasada staying? Yes or no?
Yes.
For Renard or for me?
You are the sporting director. Same exact season.
That changes.
Copy paste.
Okay, that changes things.
Actually, no. You know what? No. I think Alex answered as, what would Renard do? So I'm going to ask you the same way. Is he back?
Renard will bring him back for sure.
Okay.
because
That was
results
that
are
was
what matters.
okay.
Yeah, yeah, I think he will be back, but I don't think he's gonna be back. Are we gonna give grades for Hernando Sada right now? I think out of 10, his season. What do you guys think? If you have to grade him, because it's a postmortem of Hernando Sada today. If you guys want me to go ahead, I can start with my own grade. But you know what? Let's let Alex start. How would you grade Hernando Sada out of 10?
Wow, a lot of pressure. I'd probably say something where I would say around a 5, like a bang out Roberto. Just Roberto, just because I think with Lasada, there's other factors as well for a head coach. Like he still did come into a team that lost so many rocks. Like I think that was always going to be tough for any coach. Like you lose Mihailovic, Johnston, Kone. You don't have Kyoto for large parts of the season. That's going to hurt any coach. So I think the fact that he had that run in the middle of the season that they did showed potential, but then also with how the year ended and how the year started, those are of course worries. Those are red flags, so to speak. But then again, yeah, I'd say just don't. The fact that some young players did progress, so a guy like Chouanier took a huge step forward. I think the Canadian Championship final can't be understated. Like, yes, I mean they didn't have like beating TFC, and everyone was beating TFC this year. So I mean maybe it's not as much of an achievement in hindsight, but as we know, TFC Montreal, TFC always gets up for those cup matches. So that Montreal got past TFC can't be forgotten. All those things considered, but then also how they had a playoff spot. They lost, what was it? They won one of their last 7 games and still only missed a playoff spot by 1 point. I think a 5. I think there was enough ups, enough downs. It was like a true roller coaster.
Elias.
Yeah, a Canadian Classic win is always a trophy. So in my eyes, they got 3 trophies this year. I'm going to give him a 6.5, and I have reasons. 5. Can I explain?
Wow. Yeah, for sure you can. I'm just shocked and surprised.
5
yeah,
out of 10 because 50% because he was only good for half the season because half the games were home. That's the 5 out of 10.
Okay, so in your way of in your way of giving
exactly,
grades,
I'm like a school teacher.
Most of the people,
it's a grading rubric. It's like a grading rubric, right?
Okay,
so
go.
I'll give him 4 out of 8 because half the games were a disaster, half the games were great. So you know what? You get 4 points for that. You get 1 point because we saw a lot of young players develop. We saw Mathieu Chouanier, we saw Jonathan Savoie, we saw Nathan Salib, we saw progress. Not great progress from everybody, but really strong progress from a select few of the younger players. So I give him a point for that. And I give him 0.5 because of the absolute dumpster fire that was the situation he inherited and also the injury crisis at the beginning of the season. I give him 0.5 because I feel bad because no coach in the first season should have to go through his first 2 months in charge with every single obstacle you could throw at this feels like one of those nightmare football manager saves where the game is just like, let's throw every evil thing we can at him and see how he does. So I'll give him an extra 0.5 because he managed to get the team out of that. So that is my 6.
That's when I reload, by the way. That's when I reload in Football Manager. I don't save when I reload. No, but wow, you're too generous, man. I would go for a 4 out of 10. The reason behind this is just the end of the season. Just if he had won at least 3 games in the last 6 games, in the last 8 games, for me, he would have had at least a 6.5. The thing is, he lost the dressing room at the end of the season. And for me, this is a no-no when you're a soccer coach, when you're an MLS head coach. You cannot lose the dressing room. And I feel that he completely lost the trust of the players. And this is not good. So 4 out of 10. And the reason why I give him 4 is because, as I said, the pros that I said before, I think his communication is great. And I think, as you said, in developing players is really, really important. And that's what you need in Montreal. But no. 4 out of 10. And I'm being a bit generous, I think.
So it all averages out to 5. So I think Alex is the correct one here.
Good,
So Alex,
good. So we're not going to talk about it, and I wanted to talk about it now, but we'll leave it for next week because it's taking a bit of time, and we have a few questions from our followers, so we'll answer those if you guys don't mind. So let's start with Tate that asked us a question. What's your guess on how many DPs the team will have next season? I love those questions because we have no grounds to really stand on. And so, if I have to take a guess, I would say 1 again, because this is how Montreal is. It's very tough, very, very tough to answer that question. But I don't think we're going to see CF Montreal spend a lot because this is not what the team wants to do. They want to develop their young players. So 1 DP is what I think will happen for 2024. Elias, I'll give you.
I rolled a dice that I have on my desk here to kind of just to represent just how random it's going to be, because again, it actually landed on 5, and since that's I had to abandon the bit because there's no way they're getting 5. I'm just gonna say 1. It's not gonna be Victor Wanyama. I think they're gonna go out there and get a new DP, but I think 1 is probably the least controversial answer I can give. So yeah.
Alex?
Interesting. I'll go 2. I just think it's ambitious, but I just think, I mean, you mentioned the development of young players. For better, for worse, it helps to have quality around young players as well. Like, you can't just throw the young kids out to an extent. I mean, everyone wants to emulate the Philly model. Yes, Philly's had, you can go down the list of all the great young talent that's come out of Philly, but it helps when you have the likes of a Gazdag, Ure, etc. I mean, we'll see I think there's enough DPs out there that aren't breaking the bank. And I think, look, there's a parallel of a team that doesn't spend too much money. That's like Vancouver. They were able to find DPs at pretty cut rate prices that are effective. I'd like to think that the fact that I just feel like if you go 2 seasons in a row with just 1 DP, that's pretty inexcusable, really, in MLS when it's such a top heavy league. So I'll say 2 just because maybe that's a bit optimistic of me.
Why not? We'll be very happy if it's 2. And Matthew agrees with you. He says 2 DPs, Wanyama and Herrera. So yes, 2 DPs, but from the existing squad. So no new players as DPs. We have a question that's very interesting from Andrew Schaffner. What's up with Sean Rea? Is he in or out? Will Losada return next season? Do you think Vincent will get more playing opportunities next year? Has Zahir earned a spot on the roster for next year? So let's start with the first question. Let's go with the, just brief answers. Elias, what's up with Sean Rea? Is he in or out?
Sean Rea is going to be back for sure. But I don't see his role changing at all.
I think he's going to be back. I think if it's a different head coach, he'll see the pitch more. But if not, then it's going to be tough for him. Alex?
If Losada is back, I'd say he's technically out. I'd say a loan. I think a loan might be best for both parties. I think if at his age, Elias is a couple years older and he got a loan. I think Sean Rea could get a loan. If Losada is gone, I think he's back.
Interesting. Next question, Alex, you'll start. Will Losada return next season? We talked about it. Yes or no?
I'll say yes. Just I finding a new coach and starting from scratch, I don't see it happening at this stage. So I'll say yes.
Yeah, I think I was clear when I said no. And Elias?
Yeah, I think he's going to be back.
Nice. Elias, do you think Vincent will get more playing opportunities next year?
Stays healthy, absolutely. I think he brings everything that Losada wants in an attacker. So I think, of course, if he's hot, keep him on the field.
Alex, I'm pretty sure you saw Vincent a lot before even he signed with CF Montreal. Do you think he's going to get more playing time next year?
Yes, because I think of all the Montreal forwards that I saw play this year, he was the one that just seem to make things happen out of nothing, and they're going to need that if there's, especially if there's not a number 10 signed. And also, he's, I think, isn't he the youngest as well? So the fact that he's
Yeah,
got the
I
most
think so.
potential and that he's also shown the most, he should be getting a lot more minutes.
Yeah, I think it was interesting, and I'm pretty sure we're going to see him grow in Montreal, which is really, really interesting. And last but not least, has here earned a spot on the roster for next year? I'll answer first. Yes, 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 and yes. Rida Zuhir has to be in the roster and has to be in the rotation. He should have been in the rotation this year, but he wasn't. So I'm very happy that he proved to be the player that I thought he was in the MLS, in the USL. Sorry, I'm always get mixed up with all the leagues. So do you guys agree with Rida here or no?
Yes, I mean, the USL is a pretty good league, and he
Yeah,
tore it up, and showed an offensive side that we hadn't seen. I think it shows what confidence does to player. It feels like him; he's always just been so timid for Montreal, and and I think this shows what a bit of confidence. So bring him back and give him confidence.
exactly. Elias,
Yeah, with
Rida?
Wanyama gone, I think it's a no-brainer. Not only that, but I also want to see Jean Yedesi come back. He spent 2 years in CPL, and he's turned into an incredible winger. Lots of pace, lots of that final ball ability that playing vertically needs. And I think that having him, especially if some of these forwards are going to go, because respectfully, it just has not worked out. I think having him come in young, hungry, lots of legs, I think that he's a no-brainer to come back to.
Interesting. Interesting for Jean Lassie. I don't think he has a place if Losada comes back, unless he sticks with his 3-4-3, but I doubt it.
I
I
hope
think
so.
he wants to go back with the number 10. Finally, we do have one last question. It's from Simple Guy. Were you disappointed that Gabriel Gervais did not give an update on accomplishments and progress on off the field topics? I certainly was. CFMTL budget is dependent on increasing revenues and have no idea if anything has been accomplished. Let's go, Elias. I'll let you answer the first one.
I was not disappointed because, like every year, it will be happening towards the end of the calendar year. So look out for that in mid to late December. But yeah, he's got a lot of questions, and he's got
Yeah,
a lot to kind of break down, because this is a pivotal year. This is a pivotal off season, not just for the club, but for the administration as well. So look out for that, and we will be breaking it down in detail. But I wasn't surprised at all.
Alex.
Yeah, I mean, I would probably echo what Elias would say on that one. I mean, I don't know typically how often the media gets to speak to Gabriel Gervais in Montreal, but yeah, it feels like it's such an interesting time with Montreal. All the pressure, all that's gone on off the field, on the field. Even just little, like, it feels like from everything, from the rebrand, from the little things like the MLS Next Pro debate, to all the sales, to the deep, like, there's just so much going on, and a lot of it relates to the financial and the off the field side. So yeah, it's huge, especially because all of that kind of gets forgotten if you have a year like last year. But if you have more years like this year, it's only going to put more pressure, I'd say.
Yeah, I completely agree. I'll be very disappointed if it doesn't happen. I think that would be really, really bad for the club. But yeah, I'm very interested to see, what he has to say on increasing the revenues. I hope that they were able to increase the revenues because, you know, I don't know, like they need a strategy regarding that. So hopefully they were able to come up with a strategy to increase the revenue. So I can't wait to see what he has to say. But yeah, no, I wasn't surprised it didn't happen because it wasn't time right now to do that. But it will happen. I'm pretty sure it will. So that's it, I think, for today. There will be no social media because we've already gone off, too long. I think this time at 2 hours 6 minutes right now. So sorry about that. We're trying to keep it between an hour and a half, an hour and 45, but there was a lot to say. Alex, thanks a lot for being here with us. It's always fun to have you on the show. Thanks a lot for being available for us. And man, you know how much I love your work. So please continue.
Hey, that extends to you, Hady. Pleasure as always, and likewise to Elias. It's been really fun to really dive into your Montreal work this season, and always a pleasure to hop on and chat Montreal. Like I love what's going on in Montreal, and I mean, I was fun, a lot more
Never a
fun
dull moment.
last year, maybe, but it's always fun to keep an eye on what's going on, especially all the youngsters. Like if you follow the Canadian men's national team, you kind of have to keep an eye on Montreal, and that's what's exciting about it.
Exactly. Thanks a lot again, Elias. Thanks for being here with me. Fortunately, Eve wasn't able to come today, but Elias, you were here, loyal as ever. Thanks a lot, man.
Always. What else am I gonna do? Got nothing else to do.
And
But
of
bother you
course,
guys.
you and of course, the auditors, the spectators, thanks a lot for being here with us. It's always fun to do that episode. Of course, you all know my spiel at the end of the show. Our show is always going to be free for you. Our content is always going to be free for you. But in case you want to help us grow the product, feel free to join our Patreon page to be one of our Patreons to help us grow the podcast and develop new things. Thanks a lot for being here, and see you next week for another episode of The Ball is Round.